I am trapped here. I am locked in this room. No one is coming to help me. I have not eaten anything for days.
Those were Mira Ahuja's words. Quiet, careful, and measured. She recorded them alone inside her own home, her voice steady but restrained, as if even emotion itself might put her in danger. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize what she was living through. She simply stated the truth as clearly as she could, knowing she might not get another chance. The video was short, barely a minute long, but it carried the weight of months of fear and years of silence. At the time it was recorded, no one knew it existed. No police officer, no neighbor, no investigator. Just Mira, speaking into a phone she had hidden, trying to leave behind proof of what she believed was coming. In 2019, the Ahuja family lived in a meticulously planned suburb north of Dallas, Texas. The kind of place designed to feel safe. Identical houses lined quiet streets. Lawns were trimmed on schedule. Cars were parked neatly in driveways. Nothing appeared out of place, and that was the point. Predictability was the neighborhood's defining feature. From the outside, the Ahuja household fit perfectly into that environment. Arjun Ahuja worked in corporate compliance, a profession rooted in rules, structure, and enforcement. He was articulate, composed, and well-spoken. Neighbors described him as responsible and disciplined, someone who followed the rules and expected others to do the same. Mira, by contrast, was rarely seen on her own. At school functions or community gatherings, she stayed close to her husband. She spoke softly, often hesitating before answering simple questions. When she did respond, her eyes instinctively shifted toward Arjun, as if checking whether she was allowed to speak. To outsiders, Mira seemed reserved, perhaps shy. No one suspected that her silence was learned behavior. Inside the Ahuja home, control was constant and deliberate. Arjun managed every financial account. Bank access, credit cards, online payments, everything passed through him. Mira received small amounts of cash for groceries and household expenses, and every purchase was later reviewed. Receipts were questioned. Deviations were noted. Passwords were another form of control. Email accounts, phone plans, online services. Mira didn't have independent access to any of them. Even her immigration documents were kept locked away in a cabinet Arjun controlled. He framed these measures as responsibility, as protection, as tradition. To Mira, they were barriers designed to ensure she had nowhere to turn. Contact with friends was discouraged. Visits were framed as unnecessary or risky. Isolation was presented as safety. Over time, Mira's world shrank until her home became both her entire environment and her greatest threat. When she questioned him or failed to meet expectations, the response became physical. At first it was slaps. Then it escalated. The injuries were placed carefully, hidden beneath long sleeves and scarves. Arjun never lost control of his tone. He never shouted. His calmness was part of the terror. After each incident, the message was the same. The police wouldn't believe her. He was respected. She had no proof. Reporting him would cost her custody of her children and possibly her legal status. These warnings were delivered methodically, not emotionally, as if they were simply facts she needed to accept. No emergency calls were ever made from the house. No neighbors reported disturbances. Mira avoided medical care unless absolutely necessary. She believed that exposure would only make things worse later. Silence felt like survival. What frightened her most wasn't just the violence itself. It was Arjun's certainty afterward. He never appeared panicked or remorseful. He spoke as if her obedience was owed and her resistance was betrayal. Leaving, he told her repeatedly, was not an option. By late 2020, Mira began to understand something that terrified her. Compliance no longer guaranteed safety. The violence had intensified, and Arjun's monitoring had become relentless. She realized that staying carried its own escalating risk. For the first time, she considered leaving not as a possibility, but as a necessity. At the same time, she understood how dangerous that decision could be. She didn't believe Arjun would allow her to leave quietly. The idea of escape carried the threat of retaliation. So she prepared without announcing anything. Her routine stayed the same. She continued managing the household as expected. But beneath that normalcy, she began creating small gaps of independence. She hid injuries carefully. She chose clothing strategically. She avoided situations that might invite questions. She began saving money in amounts too small to be noticed. A few dollars at a time, taken from grocery funds or family gifts. The cash was hidden inside a sewing kit Arjun had never opened. She stopped writing important phone numbers down, committing them to memory instead. Meera reconnected with an old friend, Kavya Sharma. Communication was cautious and limited. Emails were brief and sent from public computers at libraries or stores. She avoided emotional language and details that could draw attention if messages were intercepted. Privately, she began documenting what was happening. Dates of incidents, descriptions of injuries, exact words used in threats. The record wasn't kept in one place. Notes were hidden, rewritten, and sometimes deleted. Evidence mattered, but possession of it could be dangerous. One incident stood out. During an argument over money, Arjun struck her and calmly told her that if she ever tried to leave, no one would know what really happened. The statement wasn't angry. It was precise. Meera understood it as a warning. From that moment on, fear became constant. As Meera continued preparing quietly, the pressure inside the house intensified. Arjun's behavior shifted from controlled monitoring to constant suspicion. He no longer trusted routine. Every small deviation became a potential threat to his authority. When Meera left the house, even briefly, he demanded explanations. Grocery trips took too long. Library visits were questioned. Silence became suspicious. The financial scrutiny tightened further. Receipts were inspected line by line. If an item appeared unnecessary, Meera was forced to justify it. Arjun accused her of wasting money and hiding things from him. His tone remained calm, but the accusations carried weight. Each question reinforced the same message. He was watching everything. As his sense of control weakened, the violence escalated. Incidents that once followed arguments now occurred without provocation. Physical force became a tool of reminder rather than reaction. Meera noticed that the abuse no longer needed a trigger. It simply arrived when Arjun felt challenged, even internally. One night, after pushing her against a wall, he told her that accidents were common in homes like theirs. The statement wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted. It was delivered as a quiet observation. Meera understood exactly what he meant. From that point forward, the fear changed shape. It was no longer about enduring pain. It was about survival. Sleep became fragmented. Meera learned to rest lightly, alert to changes in movement or sound. She memorized the rhythm of the house. Doors, footsteps, silence. Her phone stayed hidden but charged. Every day felt like borrowed time. In the final days, Arjun rarely left the house when he wasn't working. He paced. He watched security camera feeds obsessively. The system that once blended into the background now dominated daily life. Alerts were checked repeatedly. Manual overrides became frequent. The children sensed the tension. They were instructed to stay quiet, to stay in their rooms, to avoid questions. Meals were inconsistent. Familiar routines disappeared. Meera limited her interactions with them, fearing that even affection could draw unwanted attention. The night before her death, an argument began over finances and spiraled quickly. This incident crossed a line. The violence was more severe than anything before. Blood was visible in the bathroom. Afterward, Arjun ordered Meera to clean everything thoroughly. He stood nearby as she did, reminding her again that no one would ever believe her version of events. That night, Meera barely slept. Early the next morning, Arjun told her to carry laundry down the staircase. He positioned himself nearby, watching. The children were upstairs and not present. What happened next would later become the central question of the case. At 7:18 a.m., emergency services received a call reporting a fall. Paramedics arrived to find Mira unconscious at the base of the stairs. She had sustained severe head trauma. Arjun told responders she had slipped while carrying laundry. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no witnesses. Mira was transported to the hospital and pronounced dead shortly afterward. Medical staff documented injuries consistent with blunt force trauma, but relied on the history provided. Within 2 days, her death was classified as accidental. The cremation followed quickly. With no body and no objections, the possibility of later examination vanished. The official narrative settled into place. When Kavya Sharma returned to Texas, the world she stepped back into felt unchanged. Daily routines resumed, notifications returned, and then, without warning, Mira's message appeared. The timestamp immediately stood out. It had been sent days before Mira's death, yet delivered months later. Kavya opened the video expecting confusion. What she saw instead was clarity. Mira sat close to the camera, as though space itself had become a risk. Her face showed signs of injury that had not been publicly acknowledged. The bruising was visible, but her voice remained controlled. She didn't plead. She didn't speculate. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who had already accepted that time was limited. She explained that she was afraid of her husband, that she was preparing to leave, that she believed he would try to stop her. And finally, she made a request, not emotional, not dramatic, but firm. If something happened to her, it was not an accident. Kavya didn't wait. She contacted law enforcement the same day and turned over the video. Investigators immediately recognized its significance, not because it proved a crime on its own, but because it challenged the certainty of the original conclusion. Accidental deaths depend on trust in circumstance. This message introduced doubt. Digital forensics confirmed the file's authenticity. Metadata showed when it was recorded, when it was sent, and why it had failed to deliver. The delay wasn't human, it was technical. Mira had done what she believed was enough. With that confirmation, the case moved out of administrative closure and into formal re-examination. The narrative that had once seemed settled was no longer secure. Once reopened, the investigation widened rapidly. Detectives approached the case not as an isolated incident, but as a sequence. Every action in the weeks leading up to Mira's death was examined for intent and context. Medical experts reviewed imaging taken before Mira was pronounced dead. Without a body, their conclusions were necessarily cautious, but they were not neutral. The injury showed a concentrated impact inconsistent with a typical stair fall. It did not confirm homicide, but it weakened the assumption of accident. Digital analysts reconstructed timelines using recovered data. Arjun's online searches drew particular attention. He had looked up information about household falls, stair injuries, and insurance outcomes related to domestic deaths. These searches occurred weeks before the incident, not after. The home security system logs revealed something else. Camera feeds had been manually interrupted during the early morning hours on the day Mira died. Coverage resumed later. There was no technical malfunction recorded. The interruption required user action. Financial records told a parallel story. Mira had been quietly saving money. The amounts were small but consistent. Phone records confirmed contact with a legal aid organization shortly before her death. These actions aligned with preparation, not despair. At trial, prosecutors avoided sensationalism. Instead, they presented pattern. Experts explained how abuse escalates when control is threatened. Digital evidence was placed on timelines. Witnesses described injuries they had seen and fear they had misunderstood. The defense argued coincidence. They emphasized the absence of direct eyewitnesses and the lack of physical remains. Prosecutors responded by showing how each piece of evidence supported the same conclusion independently. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Guilty. Arjun Ahuja was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole decades later, as permitted under state law. In delivering the sentence, the court emphasized that crimes committed behind closed doors often rely on silence and trust, and that neither could excuse deliberate harm. His parental rights were suspended pending family court rulings. The children were placed permanently with relatives outside the state. Supervised contact was denied based on the nature of the conviction. Official records were amended. The death certificate was updated to reflect homicide. Insurance claims tied to the original accidental ruling were voided. Financial benefits associated with Mira's death were frozen under state law. The video Mira recorded became part of the permanent court record. Prosecutors later stated that it did not change the facts of the case, but it changed whether those facts were ever examined. Law enforcement agencies began referencing the case in training sessions focused on domestic violence investigations, particularly those involving delayed evidence and staged accidents. Mira Ahuja did not leave the house alive. But she left behind something that survived control, fear, and silence. Not every warning is heard in time, but some are loud enough to echo long after the voice is gone. Viewers, stories like this force us to confront uncomfortable questions, not just about one individual, but about human behavior as a whole. Why do you think some people feel such an intense need to control others? What is happening inside their mind when power becomes more important than empathy, and fear replaces compassion? At what point does control turn into entitlement, and entitlement turn into violence? Why do you think people like this don't stop themselves, even once, to consider the permanent consequences of their actions? Is it a belief that they are smarter than everyone else? That they can manipulate the situation forever? Or that the truth will never surface? Do they convince themselves that rules don't apply to them, or that silence will continue to protect them no matter how far they go? And what about the warning signs? Why do you think they are so often overlooked? Is it because the abuse happens behind closed doors? Because the person presents a calm and respectable image to the outside world? Or because society is still uncomfortable confronting domestic violence unless it's obvious and loud? How many moments do you think pass where someone senses something is wrong, but chooses not to question it? We also want to hear your thoughts on the other side of this story. Why do you think victims so often stay silent for so long? Is it fear, isolation, manipulation, or the gradual erosion of self-trust? What could make it easier for people in these situations to be believed before it's too late? Your perspective matters. Conversations like these help challenge harmful assumptions and bring awareness to realities that are too often ignored. Share your thoughts, experiences, or reflections in the comments below. If this story made you pause, think, or question something, please comment, share, and subscribe so these discussions can reach more people. We'll meet you next time.